Hey there, rock and roll podcast fans. This is Mike Hoban. Welcome to Rat Tales, the podcast that brings you the music and stories of the Boston rock scene that grew out of the mid-'70s at the Rat and some of the other hellhole joints, each with their own sick charm.
Nectar of the gods, golden wine, purer than a virgin, land of Diane.
And that was Land of Diane from the Freeborne from their Peak Impressions album released in 1968 on Monitor Records. It featured our guest Nick Carstoiu, who played guitar for the Freeborne. Thanks for being here today, Nick, on the Boston Beat. When did you first start to play an instrument?
So I was about 7, I think, and I was playing piano. My sister was my teacher.
Who were your musical influences?
Oh boy, back then. Well, I can sort of divide the time between pre-Beatles and after Beatles, because the Beatles essentially changed everything for me. I was a Beatlemaniac, and as fortunately I had a lot of theory and classical music, and so I was prepared to take advantage of I had a developing skill as a musician, also in singing. So when the Beatles came out, I decided that I didn't want to be playing cello recitals on Sunday afternoons in front of a bunch of old ladies in formal dress and so forth, which is what I was doing. I picked up a guitar and started to try to write songs and singing and so forth, and playing along with some of the Beatles songs and so forth, and looked to form a band. And that was because of the Beatles. Prior to the Beatles, I liked the Four Seasons. I think some of the doo-wop stuff I liked, some of the novelty songs I liked. I think the first song that I remember distinctly liking enough to buy a 45 was Wanda Jackson singing "Let's Have a Party." And there I got other songs like, let's see, what was it? I can't remember the name of the band, but they did something called Yogi. I'm Yogi, boom, boom, I'm Yogi, baby, boom, boom, I'm Yogi, boom, boom, hey, boo-boo, which was, like Yogi Bear, except that it was about, the lyrics was about a yogi, who could walk on needles and stuff,
How did the Missing Links form?
Well, I one of the other members of the Freeborne was also a founder with me of the Missing Links, by the name of Dave Codd, the bass player. We formed, I'd say, probably 64, late 64, 65. Dave was playing drums in another band. And I believe he might have moved to Framingham, but we still maintain our friendship, and we decided that we would like to form a band together. So I already knew I had been in a band prior to the Missing Links that consisted of 3 people, a black man named Pierre, who was a singer, myself on a K guitar, and Charles Colson, I think, not Charles Colson, but someone in Brookline, another friend that played bongos. And we got our first gig at a frat party on Beacon Street, and we knew 3 songs. We had one small amp, and 1 microphone, and the guitar was plugged into the amp, and Charlie was just playing the bongos. We knew All Day and All of the Night, Twist and Shout, and Louie Louie. And those 3 songs we played for like 3 hours. So over and over and over again. That was my first gig in a band. So then I met up with Dave, and we decided to form this, and I knew the kids in the neighborhood, and one of them was a drummer with the Rogers set named Robin Baltimore. He was the drummer, and Sevy Grossman, who lived in the same building as I did, he he played the keyboard. I played rhythm guitar, and Dave played lead, I believe. And Sevi, by the way, went on to play with Willie Alexander in the Boom Boom Band. He became a bass player. So that was the original. At one point we had Peter Malick too, and we had another bass player as well, David, I can't think of his name, but he lived in Brookline as well. The Peter Malick went on to play, I believe he was in the Broadway production of Hair, and he's a blues guitarist. We kicked him out of the band. And once I saw him recently, 5 years ago or so, at Aerosmith's old restaurant up the road, and he pointed that out to me when he said, "Hey, Peter, you know, you kicked me out of the band." I had forgotten, so. So we played a number of gigs. We played at my church and a few other gigs. It continued, but there were problems with the musicians amongst ourselves and so forth, so it broke up at a certain point. Yeah, we went to Runkle School, which is, we met in 5th grade at Runkle School in Brookline, which had a very great music department. And Dave was studying viola, and he was actually studying with, I believe, the premier violist in the BSO. His name was, last name Gomberg. And I was playing cello and studying at the New England Preparatory School at New England Conservatory. So we both were in, actually I wasn't studying there yet. I started cello at Runkle. The music teacher wanted me to play cello. She actually wanted me to play trombone first, so I played trombone for a few months. And then she asked me if I could play cello because that was a harder instrument in many ways. And so I took up cello, and so then we became part of this little string quartet with the two Gomberg twins, the daughters of this BSO violist, playing violins. Yeah. Cool. And then also at Runkle, I was they put on a production of Hansel and Gretel, and I was Hansel, and one of the Gomberg twins was Gretel, and her twin sister was her substitute as Gretel.
That's pretty cool.
And both of them were my girlfriends at the time, as well as the Wicked Witch, who was also my girlfriend.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah. Yeah, so it was the musical, you know, the operetta there that we did. Well, it was Dave and I. We didn't have a band because the Missing Links had broken up. Oh, the Missing Links, by the way, also at one point, Dave was the lead guitarist in the Missing Links, as I recall. I was the rhythm guitarist and main singer. And Teddy Parkins was on bass, along with Robin Baltimore and Sev. And Teddy Parkins went on to play with, what's his name? John Lee Hooker and Big Mama Thornton. I mean, he's a good player, bass player and a drummer. Now the Freeborne, so at a certain point that broke up, and Dave and I wanted to, you know, we're trying to think of something else, of getting other musicians, because we were writing now at this point, and you know, we wanted to have a band to play out. And I think, if I'm recalling correctly, I think we reached either Bob Margolin or Louis Lipson, but they came in together. You know, essentially they knew each other and they had played together, I think. And so we invited them into the band. We told them about what we wanted to do, and they seemed good with that. And so there we had it. And then they suggested, I believe it was them that suggested another really great musician from Brookline High named Mike Spiros and Spiros, and they pulled him in. So then we were the band, the Freeborne, and I can't remember where we practiced. I mean, at a certain point we ended up in a church in the South End where we used their basement to practice in. And that was and that became the practice place when the record was cut and everything. That's that was our practice space. I'm not sure what we did until then. Maybe we got it sooner than I thought. But we started doing some gigs here and there, and we had a couple different managers. They were useless, basically. I think it's really hard to get a good manager. And finally, we ended up with Barry Richards as our manager, and he was the one that was able to pull the record deal and so forth.
Who came up with the name? What does it mean?
Yeah, well, Dave and I came up with the name, and it was basically, there was a movie out called Born Free about a lion, about lions. And just in the course of going through, 100 different possibilities and stuff, we decided to switch it, so Freeborne, and added an E to distinguish it further. So what's funny is that, in the recent past is different. There were different versions of the Freeborne, but they all were after. But some of them, their memories are kind of skewed, because I've heard Teddy Parkins say, for example, he was in the Freeborne before the Freeborne. But that's impossible, because Dave and I came up with that name. And I remember, we were sort of in a place, I can't remember exactly where it was, but we were going through these different changes and then suggested that. So that was the very first version of the Freeborne, the one that cut the record.
Did you do originals first or covers?
We were doing both. I mean, we were writing songs, but it was budding, beginning stuff, and not completely finished. So we did a lot of covers. I mean, most of our set, I would say, was mostly covers, but we'd have 2 or 3 originals in each set, and then other songs. A lot of soul, things like Hold On by Sam and Dave, and Midnight Hour by Wilson Pickett, Mustang Sally, Wilson Pickett. And then a bunch of rock and roll songs. I remember I did like a Rolling Stone, some Dylan stuff, some Beatles stuff, and some just, Johnny B. Good, Chuck Berry, a real variety of types of music.
How long after the band formed did you start doing gigs?
Pretty soon after. I think, some of the gigs were kind of informal, like, through word of mouth. Our manager got us gigs, and mostly like frat party type situations, which were cool, because, the girls, young women, would get drunk and stuff. And they always seemed to go after Spear, but as a cutie, I was always miffed. I mean, I actually, a couple times for me, but he would, he was kind of a clown, so they seemed to like that. Yeah, and we were doing mostly frat parties and stuff until Barry Richards became our manager.
Where did you play with Van Morrison?
It's kind of hazy in my memory. It was a Boston Common concert. They would have these periodic concerts on the Common, and the platform stage set up and everything. As I recall, that gig there were several bands. We were one of them, and Van Morrison was another one of them. And there were a couple of others, probably the Beacon Street Union, maybe, I'm guessing, Ultimate Spinach, maybe, some Boston bands. So that was a jam. We may have even played more than one. I don't recall them that well. For what reason, I don't know. They just sort of faded from my memory. We were also playing, we played the Tea Party a lot. And another venue called the Psychedelic Supermarket. A number of gigs at both of those places.
Did you open for other bands?
We were opening up. We opened up for, like, at the Tea Party, we opened up for the Velvet Underground. Those are the gigs I remember the best. At the Psychedelic Supermarket, we opened up for Tim Hardin. And it was a disappointment of a show. We had just discovered him, and we were so excited to get that gig because we really loved his songs. And but then it turns out later, I found out later, he was a junkie. He was an addict, and so he must have been having withdrawal or something, because he was nasty that night. Wouldn't let anybody in the dressing room, probably because he had his equipment with him. And then his voice was horrible too. He was in bad shape. We also opened up for Canned Heat at the Psychedelic supermarket. Those are the ones I remember best.
What was it like to open for the Velvet Underground?
It was fun. And that was, as it turns out, I spoke to the manager of the Tea Party many years later. He told me that it was mid-August 1967. And Andy Warhol was their manager at the time. And he came up for that gig, and he actually filmed the gig. It's somewhere in the Velvet archives, or Andy Warhol's archives. There exists a copy of that gig. And that was the only, they played the Tea Party, I don't know, a dozen times over a couple of years. And that was the only one that he attended. And afterwards, he approached me, or someone on his behalf approached me and invited me to a party afterwards, after the gig. Just me, not the band. And I declined because they were weird. I mean, I was 17, and we were high school. I was a high school kid. Bobby was at BU, but the rest of us were high school kids, and he scared me a little bit. I mean, it looked pretty scary, and the band was very strange. And the rumor had it that Maureen Tuckerman was a quote-unquote hermaphrodite. Different name for it now, but So I was, being a high school kid and being approached in that way, I'm sure it would have been a story to tell, but I'm not sure if it would have been a nice story to tell, if you know what I mean. Because I was like a little Adonis back then, and I'm thinking, when we recorded, we had already, I'm not sure if we had recorded. We may have recorded at that point at ESP Studios in New York City, and I had this thing in my head that maybe he heard it and he came up to see us or something, and I was a little Adonis, and we're singing songs like. I just want to make love to you, and stuff like that. So I'm thinking, in retrospect, that maybe that was the reason why I was invited, because they were a pretty wild bunch, as it turns out, and we were just kids. I took the days off when I needed to. I lied, said I was sick, and like when we went down to New York and so forth. And other times, I don't know if I should include this, but we were a band of the 60s with all that implies. So, we were engaging in experiments, and sometimes I could stay up all night. Go to school the next day. I was becoming kind of a maverick at the school. I was going to a private school then, and increasingly alienated from the school because my interests were elsewhere. But my torn knee ligament in high school football allowed me to pursue because we had compulsory athletics at the school. It allowed me to pursue my dream with the Freeborne. So that school became more distant to me, not so interesting. The Freeborne was my thing. So how I did it, I don't know. I was a kid. I could go on 2 hours of sleep.
Can you talk about the Prudential gig and Flash and the Parrot?
Yeah, I had forgotten about that story, but I knew about the gig. We got this gig at the top of one of the side buildings to the Prudential, their condos, I guess, and stuff. And it was a very wealthy individual who was having a party. He had the whole top floor, all windows all around, large place. Lots of people came. The gig started at 2 o'clock in the morning and went till 6. And sort of a celebrity type gig, and Ruby Newman was not there. We were the band, essentially, and it was set up so that you were really excellent cuisine. It was set up as if you were in a boat on the Mediterranean, and you'd stop at a different country, like you'd stop at Italy, and then you'd go on to somewhere in the Middle East, and then maybe Egypt, every hour. And each hour they would bring out the food from that, the dishes that were common to that particular locality. So that was kind of fun. But so there was a very eclectic, rich people crowd there. And at one point, and they were drinking a lot, and so at one point, a person that was very drunk apparently stepped into the bathroom and stripped, and then came out streaking. And according to Dave, some people did not like what he was, he didn't like that. They were upset by this, perhaps some older people or so forth. So he when they complained to him, he said, "Well, fuck you," And there was a parrot right in that room, and the parrot picked it up. And then throughout the night, the parrot continued on, "Fuck you," or something.
What was the incident involving the Harvard Men's Club and Bob dangling from the flagpole?
Yeah, Mike would get drunk sometimes at these gigs. He liked to booze it up a bit. And so at one point he was hanging out, from the third or fourth floor or whatever, hanging on a flagpole, singing. We had to get him back in. He could be crazy when he was drunk. But his trumpet playing was not good when he was drunk. It sounded like a drunk trumpet, which didn't cut it with the regular song. So.
How did the band get to be the house band at Where It's At?
That was, again, through our manager. Our manager really set us up with all these gigs. He knew, the manager of the Where It's At was Ruth. I don't recall her last name, but she worked for WBZ, and she had started this club, which was where Commonwealth Avenue takes a turn towards Alston. Right in that bend, there's a building, and Where It's At was in there. And so our manager, the Lost had been the band, the house band, but they stopped. They left for whatever reason, I don't know. They weren't there anymore. So she was looking for a house band. Barry knew her and suggested us. And so we got our gig that way.
What were the audiences like?
It was a good audience. They liked our songs, and we had our little fan set that would always come to our gigs. I was one of the fan set when the Lost was playing there. If not a raucous crowd, but enthusiastic, through the band's set. Not much dancing happening because we didn't really. We played rock and roll and then our originals, which were really not dance pieces. At those times, the music kind of developed into it was more listening music than dance music. So they appreciated us, and we had a good time there. Yeah, we were playing some of them, Peak Impressions. I think that probably started later as in the house band. I believe so, but my memory is fairly hazy about that, but I do believe some of the first songs that we wrote, we were playing there. And they went over pretty well.
Did you tour nationally?
No. For the reason that we were high school kids. So we couldn't. We played over New England. We played up some of the gigs we had. We had a gig at Loring Air Force Base, which was at the top of Maine. So we did New England gigs, but because we're high school students, we couldn't really. If we had lasted, if the band had stayed together, I think we probably would have ended up touring nationally. But we broke up prior to that. So, when I started Berkeley College, basically the band had come to an end or was coming to an end.
Was the band aware of the Bosstown sound at the time?
Yeah, sort of. I mean, because there were a lot of bands that were cutting records and stuff. Ultimate Spinach, Beacon Street Union, Orleans, a few other bands. Of course, Van Morrison started off there in Boston when he came over from Ireland or wherever he came from. So Boston was, and Jay Giles was starting up, I recall, right around then. So there was a lot of action in Boston, and there was interest, coming from different record companies and so forth. So we're aware of this Bosstown sound. But again, we couldn't quite. Since we were high school kids, most of those bands were college bands. So, we're a little young. Even though I managed to get in, with some of those scenes. I remember, for example, I was at a party somewhere in Alston, and this guy was talking to me about how he had, he's going to manage this new band, and he was excited about the new band and stuff. And I said, "What's the name of the band?" He said, "Ultimate Spinach." I mean, so it was before they had actually started playing out. I had this conversation with their soon-to-become manager about the band that he was going to manage.
You played with some of those bands?
I think on those Boston Common concerts, I'm pretty sure we did. I mean, I'm guessing that Ultimate Spinach was there, and probably the Beacon Street Union. We never played at the houses, the Tea Party at a psychedelic supermarket. When we opened up or played with someone, it was as an opening act for a bigger name. Canned Heat, for example.
So on stage, you all used to switch instruments?
A lot. Yeah, that was one of our sort of things about the band. Spiros could play basically any instrument, maybe not lead. Bob just played lead. But Spear would switch to drums. I'd switch to keyboards. I was rhythm guitar. Dave would he wanted to play lead, but I think Bob had kind of cornered the market on that. So Dave would sometimes play drums. We had a song that we picked up off an old, it was actually Blind Willie Johnson, I think, wrote something called Can't Keep From Crying. And I had this record, I just got it recently too. It's called What's Groovin', I think, is the name of it. It was kind of a multi-band record. It had Paul Butterfield, The Lovin' Spoonful, one other band I can't think of, and then Al Cooper on a single cut playing his arrangement, which is on the piano. So it was just him and the piano and him singing Can't Keep From Crying. I really liked that a lot, so I learned the piano part. And we incorporated that into our set. But we also changed it. We had opened for an act, I think, I think we opened for the Paupers, a band called the Paupers, at the Tea Party. And the Paupers had this thing where they would have the drummer, and then on some songs they'd have 3 people on drums. So one person would have maybe a tom and a snare, or 2 toms. So there would be the combination, and when I saw that, I really dug that sound. So somehow we combined the two. So we were working on Al Cooper's arrangement, and then we added to the song a midsection where I and Spear would be on either side playing multiple drums, and that was a fun song to play. Yeah. Wake Me, Shake Me was another one when we did that at the Regent. Jeff's Boogie. Yeah, that was our break song, and it was Spear on trombone, Mike Spiros, playing it note for note. And sometimes, on occasion, he, when he was feeling especially crazy, he'd just throw the trombone, pull it completely out and go out into the audience. But that was, that was our break song. So, and amazingly, a couple of the band members don't remember it. Yeah, some of the band members don't remember that, but I confirmed it with Mike. So. I mean, yeah, and he also played a Blues Project had an original song called "Flute Thing." We were fans of the Blues Project. They did a song called "Flute Thing," and Mike played that through some sort of echo unit on his trumpet. That was another fun song to play. That was back in the days of reel-to-reel recorders,
right.
And we didn't have a sound man. There weren't sound man mixing boards then. You just kind of did it. It was very primitive, and it's always a situation where one person turns up and then the other person turns up, and I've seen that happen so many times in different bands I've been in. Barry Richards again, our manager, got it for us, and that was great. Everything was paid for. We did it in 2 different sessions. One at a place called ESP Studios, which basically catered to avant-garde jazz like Pharoah Sanders, and that was our first recording. We recorded 3 of the songs there, and then 6 months later, we went to finish the record and was booked at CBS in New York. Monitor Records was World Music before it was called World Music. I mean, essentially, it was a small company, and they were known for doing Eastern European, Middle Eastern, African, just records from different cultures. My parents had some of them because they're Romanian, so they had some of the Monitor records. They decided at one point that they didn't have anything from the United States, and there was this, in the 60s, and some burgeoning music coming out, lots of energy. They decided that they wanted to have an example from the United States of what was going on. So Barry set us up with that, and the contract is originally for 3 albums, but we broke up. That was a blast. Except the very first session was scary, never having been in a recording, a professional recording studio before. We did, well, first of all, when we came in, there were these bags of like noisemakers, like Halloween things, like things, all these different noise and percussion instruments and stuff. And I asked why they were there, and apparently the Fugs had just finished a session there, which is cool, I thought. And then I also learned subsequently that I bought a couple of records that had been recorded at ESPN, Pharoah Sanders and another Archie Shepp, I think. So we came in there, and the first song we did was Images, and I played the piano. That was a song that I pretty much wrote myself, and the piano part, or the piano solo, I was really nervous, so it's a little bit, it's out of control a little bit. That's okay. It was all right. Yeah. But we pulled it off pretty well. And then we did Peak Impressions there, and we did Land of Diana. Those 3 songs were recorded at ESP.
forces of nature and me, rushing, rushing.
I'm not sure about ESP who did. I mean, Barry was one of produced, but when we got to CBS, they had a couple of big names. I'm trying to think. Oh, what's his name? If I had it, he's well known, and I think he may have taught at Berkeley if he doesn't still. Don Pullen, I think, and another one. At any rate, there were two producers that the record company had hired specifically to produce us, and Barry also was involved, you know, with coming up with ideas and so forth. So it was a good group, and the studio was great. You know, it was from CBS. You know. We probably had written a couple more other than those songs, but we picked the ones that we thought were good. And actually, I think some of the songs, we already had the contract, so we wrote some songs for the session. Trying to think of which songs. Oh, Yellow Skies, for example, was written, one of the last songs to come in. That Sadly Acknowledged About War was sort of a surprise song that Barry and Spear put together that we didn't know about, and he said, "Hey, check this out," you know. And then some of the other songs, Mine is na 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 da 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 da. I can't even think of the song with the recorders. Was later. Bob's song we did later, and so forth. Oh, and I Must Return to Frenzy was later as well. So we actually wrote those songs for the session. Yeah. Yes, we did our own. Not only played all the instruments, but we wrote all the parts. That song that has a cello in it, a new song for Orestes or something, I think. That I remember writing the cello part on the piano, you know, at my home at the piano, and just, you know, writing the notes down and scoring it out. And Spear wrote his own trumpet part, and then we just came together and practiced it. I was a little rough on the cello because I hadn't played in a few years, you know, but I still had my skills basically so that I could pull it off. But that was all the instruments we played. I mean, those were by our design. You know, Dave came up with some bell trees and so forth that he had thought of. So we just asked for the instruments, they provided them, and we used them. Yeah, no. Yeah, Land of Diana, you know, comes from sort of Latin, Greek mythology kind of thing. It had, you know, a joke in it. They're kind of inappropriate, some of the jokes. Is it okay to put those? No, probably not, right? I mean, you can edit them out, yeah. Okay, well, I mean, you know, inside joke on the doo-be-doo-be-doo-wah, doo-wah. Well, Spear, Dave, and I used to go down the street, you know, we're feeling particularly inappropriate, you know, as young teenagers. And one of us would go, doo-ah, and the other would go, shaba, and the other go, ag. And then if you sped it up, so it would go, doo-ah, shaba, ag, doo-ah, shaba, ag, doo-ah, shaba, ag, doo, shaba, ag, douchebag. So the doo-ah, dooby-dooby-doo-ah is sort of a play on that a little bit. You know, so we're laughing at each other while we're doing this. And that just came out of nowhere, I think. I don't know. I hadn't preconceived it or anything. It just sort of came out while we were rehearsing the arrangements. arrangements were put together in practice and in rehearsals, and they were, everybody kind of contributed except the drummer. Well, actually, it was the three of us that really, Mick, Dave Codd, and I. And then Bob would be sort of left to do his own thing, you know, to come up with his own part, and Louis would come up with his own drums because Louis was great, and then we would come up with the forms, sometimes stretching the forms, adding other things to the forms. I remember I came up with a multimeter thing. We start in 5/4 and it goes to 3/4 or 6/8 and then to 4/4 in the middle. Because I had been listening to Dave Brubeck, and I dug, you know, the sort of asymmetry of an off meter. So I may have suggested, and then we sort of played around with it and came up with it. But do da 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 do da do da 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 is like take 5, and you know, bum bum ba bum boom bum 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 ba bum boom bum. You know, so that's the sort of beginning verse part is that kind of a feel of 5/4, inspired by Dave Brubeck. Yeah, I mean, we came up with our own ideas on that, but the thing that opened my mind up to it was the Dave Brubeck. All of a sudden I realized, oh, that's something you can play with, you know. That's another thing to play with. So we would do that. Towards the end, when we were about to break up, Spirit already left at that point, but with the four of us, I came up with a song that, it was an instrumental actually, I think, but it started with each of us in a different meter. It started at a certain point, and then each of us is playing a different meter, and when the common denominator came back, like, you know, 24 measures later or something like that, we'd end up at that point. So it would increasingly get more and more strange, you know, chaos, and then we end up at the same place and go on with the song. It was fun. That was fun, but that never got recorded. No, we didn't. You know, that was done at a separate session, and we didn't do any of our own mixing. Barry and the producers took care of that.
What song was the single? Who picked it to be the single?
Land of Diana and Images. And yeah, I have a copy of the single actually. We didn't make that decision. They did. You know, it did well in certain states, as I understand, but you know, we never really made much money off it because we also broke up.
Echoes of the smoke, land
Well, I do recall that apparently it was biggest in Texas. So I did receive a royalty check one time. It was a couple $100, I think. But that was the end of it, because then the band broke up and wasn't even thinking about stuff like that. So yeah, in Texas, it was big. We did have local play as well. I remember hearing something on WBCN. I think it may have been in its first year or second year at that point. WBCN was a brand new station. Things were still sort of AM at that point, but it was just starting to shift into FM radio, and WBCN was like the sort of the starting rock station on FM. And I remember hearing our songs a couple times on WBCN. That was cool. It was fun to hear yourself on the radio. Oh, way back then? Oh yeah, we were happy. I mean, we're just a bunch of high school kids that are talented musicians that have a band that, influenced by the Beatles heavily, so we're doing 3-part harmonies and stuff like that, and, having changes and, just more open-ended music. Psychedelic because of the times, but open-ended music with different subjects and sort of, whimsical. And when we heard it come out in full, I mean, this album sound, I mean, it's, CBS recording. Oh boy, wow, sounds great. We're very proud. Oh, well, I don't know about the original release. I do know from Eric Lindgren that the album was bootlegged in the 80s, in the early 80s, so this is more than a decade later. It was bootlegged in Germany and in Japan. So this was not the record company that did it. It was a bootleg. And that way, other countries became involved because it did sell. I mean, I recall seeing on the internet, years ago, I saw reviews in Swedish and Russian and Japanese and German and Spanish, French, and a couple of other languages I couldn't recognize. Oh, in Israeli, in Hebrew, I believe. So eventually it spread, and I had no idea at the time that this was happening. I had completely forgotten about the record. I found out subsequently through Eric. It just flabbergasted me. He said, "You have a cult following." I what? I couldn't believe it. Yeah, it was initially released in America, and there's, it's Eric on the new thing, CD that Eric put out. There's a picture of the Billboard announcement. Billboard announced it as a record, and there was they didn't have release dates back then, record release parties, but our gig money went up after the record, of course. Yeah, we started after the record release. We were still, the record came out, I think, in spring or summer of '68. Spring of '68. So after that, we were doing gigs promoting our record, as well as doing. I don't think so. I don't think we did. I think we did a radio show, but I can't remember what radio it was. We did play at Canopy Lake Park with Davey Maynard concert. He was the sort of the introducer. Davey Maynard was a DJ on WBZ. This again is AM. WBZ was a rock station, a rock pop station, and he was one of the DJs. Maybe. I wasn't really listening to WBZ at the time. I've kind of gone, I was listening more to BCN. So I don't know, possibly, because, again, he announced us at that gig. We also opened up for the left bank, somewhere in the North Shore. They had had their hit "Walk Away, Renee." So that was a good gig too. I don't know if they knew how to. I mean, you know, I didn't know anything about that end of it, pretty much. I was just a musician. You know, the management part and all that, I didn't have a clue as to what was going on.
How did the band break up?
We got into an argument with our manager, some things that he had done that we had a problem with. And so we fired him, essentially. And Spear was fairly close with the manager, I think. The manager himself, Barry Richards, was a musician and a singer. But there were some things he did that we didn't like. And as a result of that, we broke up. And Spear, we you know, still continued to rehearse. And at one point, Spear didn't show up to rehearsal. And we couldn't reach him. And somehow we found out, probably through his roommate, that he had taken off to California. So he just up and left. And so we had 4 of us, and without a manager. And we began to have disagreements about how we should go forward. Dave and I essentially were the principal writers now. Spear's gone. And we wanted to continue in writing originals and trying to pursue our unique type of music. Whereas Louis wanted us to go, the drummer wanted us to go more covers, you know, make money in gigs, you know, sort of standard general business stuff, you know. And then Bobby was getting increasingly into blues, but I mean, Bobby was basically going along with whatever. But then at a certain point, I started getting into jazz as well. I heard the Charles Lloyd Quartet at the old, it was an old Bay State Theater. I mean, it was a theater where Whole Foods is now on Mass Ave, near Symphony Hall. Back Bay Theater. It was named the Back Bay Theater, and they played there. And I saw them, and I started to get tired of the rock scene. You know, the fact things weren't happening and we were having arguments and so forth. And I was about to go to Berklee School of Music in college. So I just, you know, Dave and I decided we didn't want to have anything more to do with it, because it was, the other thing is we didn't have a manager. Apparently the Beacon Street Union manager was thinking of managing us, but it never happened. I'm not sure if it's just that we ran out of energy for the band or what, but, you know, so. And I understood that there was a possibility we were going to get a gig opening up for Cream, but we didn't, you know, we were gone, finished. So that would have been nice. It was good. We were only together for like a couple of years, I think. But we made a lot of it. Our mistake, of course, was to fire Barry Richards, because he got us our gigs and he got us our recording and everything. Once we were without him, we're sort of, what do we do, you know? Yeah.
Yeah, because you like the management is what you know.
I mean, some of the greats, like, you know, what if the Beatles didn't have Brian Epstein?
Wouldn't have the Beatles.
Yeah. What if Bob Dylan didn't have what's his name?
That guy.
Yeah, his manager. You know, I mean, Bob Dylan just, you know, free spirit. He can't do that stuff. You know, I mean, he does what he does, and he does it the best of anyone. But yeah. You know, they needed their managers. We had a decent manager, and once we fired him, then we kind of fell apart. Louis went on to become like I think he had a band with Donnie Nelson, who was another drummer that he grew up with. And they played for a while, and then they formed their own entertainment agency. And so, until he died, I mean, he was essentially someone who would book bands and occasionally play in some of them. Mick went on to form a band called the Incredible Two-Man Band, just him and a drummer. And apparently he had some pretty incredible drummers, including one he said that Joe Perry stole from him. And then when that guy quit, he had a second drummer that was also outstanding. Both of whom were at Berkeley, and Joe Perry took him too. I think that's what he told me anyway. But he had this band, and they were very successful up to a point. You know, touring up and down the East Coast, making good money because two people, you know, good money. And they played a lot of covers. It was all mostly covers. Well done, and he was like a one-man band himself. I mean, you know, he had Hammond, and he had, you know, stacks of keyboards, and, you know, and he sang, and he was the lead singer too. As far as Dave Codd, Dave went on to, I mean, we met up in Syracuse at a certain point, but he eventually ended up moving down to Texas, where he went to U of Texas in Austin, I think, music school there, and got married and so forth, and then moved back up here to Arlington and formed a band. Actually, he was recording his own music, and let's see, who haven't I accounted for though? Oh, there's Mick Spear, Bobby. Well, you know Bobby. Bobby went on to play with Muddy Waters. There's a whole story there, and since then he's formed his own blues band. I mean, he's formed a number of them, and he's played with, you know, legends, blues legends throughout. And you know, just, I mean, I have a picture of him on stage. He lended Keith Richards one of his guitars. He has apparently a great guitar collection, and he's on stage and behind Mick Jagger, who's singing, leaning back, singing into his face, and Keith Richards is standing there with the guitar, and you see in the backdrop of the picture there's Muddy Waters is coming up the stairs of the stage with another guitar. I was like, wow. You know, I envy that. I mean, he you know, he's played with everybody. He's quite a musician as a result. I mean, he's sort of encyclopedic blues musician, can play any style. So I, for my part, I went off. I was traveling all over. I tried to get into Canada at one point because I had a real problem with our country in Vietnam, but I couldn't stay there. You know, you had to have a certain amount of points to get papers. In order to get papers, you needed to have a job, but in order to get a job, you needed to have the papers. It was a catch-22 situation. So I ended up coming back, and we ended up in Syracuse, and somehow Dave Codd was there too. We met up, and then we split apart again. I went off. We moved back here to Massachusetts. I went to law school, Boston College Law School, 3 years. I always like to say after I graduated, I passed the bar on the way to a saloon. I got back into a rock band with Dave Codd called Mr. Moto in the early 80s. And we played the Channel and the Rat and Bun Ratties and, you know, all the local clubs. We played a lot. Opened up for Peter Tork's band at one point. Peter Tork borrowed my piano, my electric piano. He had a Yamaha electric piano. He borrowed it for his gig at Bun Ratties, and we opened up for them. They were a good band. It was like rock and roll, you know, really good. Yeah. I was impressed. That was a pretty good gig, and we did some recording at Blue Jay Studios, and it was a good band. But again, it broke up. I mean, it's hard to keep bands together because everybody has their own opinions, and if there's this, some people want to control it more, and other people want it more diverse, and, you know, democratic and so forth. So. Oh yeah, I should mention that when we broke up, I formed this recording project band. It was my one other time as a lead singer was in a recording project, and it's a great story there about how I got Stuart Levine excited about it. Stuart Levine was one of the top producers. He was married to one of Quincy Jones's daughters. He produced Up Where We Belong, that won best theme song won an Oscar for best theme song. with Joe Cocker and can't think of her name.
Jennifer.
Jennifer, yeah, yeah. Up Where We Belong was the theme song for French Lieutenant's Woman. And he produced Minnie Riperton, Albert King, Jazz Crusaders. He was an arranger for the Jackie Gleason Variety Show. Produced Boy George, Dr. John. And he'd flip, when he heard this tape, I slipped him a tape on an instinctual feel that he might be interested. And he called back saying it was the best music he'd heard in the last 10 years and, you know, this and that and the other thing. But we were not prepared to seize the opportunity. And when he called my co-writer guy, when he asked if we had other stuff, my co-writer guy said, oh yeah, we got plenty. We hadn't done anything in a few months. We didn't have anything. So we had to cram. It just didn't work out. But it was, you know, he wanted to get us, he wanted to bring us, he had a gig in Africa with Hugh Masekela, and he wanted to bring us there. The Quincy Jones' daughter called us DC Comics. She thought that we could appeal to different markets. Because it was kind of, it was, you know, it was really cool music, very lively. And Mark Williamson, the other writer, was great with lyrics. I mean, he was just a lot of really cool, zany, clever, witty lyrics that made you smile, you know, kind of thing.
Say it again.
The Twins Love School, which you could read either as the Twins verbally love school, or the Twins Love School, where you learn about loving. It came from a Crest commercial, apparently. That came about because our drummer had died, and in 2008, in October of 2008. Bob got in touch with Dave and I, as well as Mick. But Mick wasn't responding to emails at the time, so he emailed us and told us that Louis had passed away. And I actually went to the memorial service, which was at some place near Boston, in Boston College, one of the Boston College buildings, because Lou's sister worked there. It was a very touching memorial service. He had pancreatic cancer, which and so it was, after that, Bob suggested, why don't we write a blues song? You know, let's suggest, why don't we get together and do something for Lou? You know, write a song dedicated to Lou. And so he brought out the initial idea, and he had already written his part. But the idea was to have each one of us sing a verse. It would be a 12 with no drums. And so each one of us would sing a verse and then solo on the respective instrument. Started with Bob on a slide. And he used a 32 Gibson, I think. He showed us a picture of it. It's like an amazing instrument. And so he sang his no drums in this blues, you know, and then played his solo. And then Dave came in with a really, really clever set of lyrics that essentially cited about 8 songs, cover songs that we used to do. You know, It's All Over Now, Ain't That a Shame, In the Midnight Hour. I can't think of some of the other songs. Louie Louie. And by the way, underneath I play some Louie Louie, and Bob plays Louie Louie in one of the things. And so we all recorded separately in our own studios. I recorded my keyboard part and vocal. My thing, I took the lyric from Can't Keep From Crying, but then I altered it a little bit. You know, I think I say, I can't keep from crying. They're all gone, long, long gone. It happened just like that. You know, like death sometimes. Thought, you know, suddenly. I was thinking Katrina, actually, you know, too, at the time. Yeah, so we put that together in our separate studios and then just kind of combined it. And Dave did the mix at his studio. I think it pretty much sounds like we're playing together. And I attribute to that the fact that because we played together, we actually did play together so long, we could hear each other and play to each other, knowing each other. And it worked out pretty well. And as a result of that, Mick, by the way, never was in it because he never responded, so we just went along without him. After that, Dave and I decided to continue and to try to do some more songs, and we wrote these 2 other songs. There were others too that we have never finished. And I'd go down to Nashville and for a few days, and we work out stuff and then come back. And again, it was a situation where Dave does his stuff at his studio, except for where we rehearsed. We didn't record there together, but we rehearsed stuff there. I recorded my parts here, he there. We put it together, and we came out with This Is It, and the other one, That Was That. I can't remember what the other one was. It has a railroad train, which he had a portable recorder. He went to some train tracks and actually recorded a train. And in the process, he gets this phone call. He operated a business, and so he's going, the person calls him. He said, "Hey, can I call you back?" You hear the train. He said, "Can I call you back, Bob? Can I call you back?" And so he played with that. He sampled it and put it in different parts of the song. They're all dark songs. This Is It is essentially a person that's just died some way, suggesting maybe not so nice a way. And he's sort of, he's lost and he's trying to figure out what's going on and stuff, So, dark. He hears voices, but nobody's there.
The next song is called This Is It, and This Is It.
1, 2, 3.
No, no, that was it. I mean, Dave and I had Mr. Moto together when we opened for Peter Tork. But Bob just joined us for that one. Bob is so busy. I mean, he is. Plus, he has a production studio now, so he's producing as well, and he writes. He's a columnist. He's the manager for the Muddy Waters Tribute Band, and he writes a line for Blues Review. I mean, he's extremely busy. But he did find some time for us, obviously, for this gig. We probably would have had more rehearsals, but we couldn't accommodate him. So.
Wow. So how did the reunion at the Regent and Arlington come about?
I'm trying to think of how. I think Dave might have become aware of it first. Because I got an email with a list of bands that were playing for this. I thought it was a joke. Because some of the names, some of the names of the band seemed silly or something. And I thought, what is this, a kind of joke? And he said, no, this is real. This is, we've been contacted. I'm not sure who. Oh, it might have been Bob that was contacted first because he was more, you could find him easier. And then the word got around, and he said, "Okay, yeah, this sounds good. This would be fun." So we essentially said, "Okay, let's figure out and do it." I wish we had a manager though, because we weren't able to market. I didn't know anything about that. So not a lot of people. I mean, we had some people, but we probably could have done better if we had had someone to take over that, or if we knew that we had to do that. We sort of thought that WMBR was going to take care of that, but they were very busy, obviously, and on limited budget too. So, but it was a great. I mean, it was a lot of fun to do, and it was great when everybody came up and we had our rehearsals and we hung out, and the night of the gig we were up to like 8 o'clock in the morning. Drinking wine and just, having a good time. But when we did play, I mean, when we were on, it was fun. It was fun. It was great. It was great to be back there on stage again. I've always enjoyed being on stage. It's just I haven't had many occasions of late, and I can't get into like lugging equipment around. I mean, that's just I'm past that. I'm done with that. Getting home at 4 o'clock in the morning kind of thing. But that was a lot of fun. I wish we could do more, but they're not around. You see, it's hard to get everybody together. And Aaron, of course, since our drummer died, David made friends with Aaron Smith, who was the Temptations drummer. He had done. He's the drummer on Papa's a Rolling Stone, who won the Grammys. Oh boy, does he.
Yeah, man.
Yeah, he's really powerful. He would do a lot of two-hand stuff of the same thing, which I hadn't seen a drummer do ever to that extent. It's so much more powerful when that happens. Yeah, he was great. It was great. A blast to play with.
Times change, and minds change with them. In the end, you'll know. No time. Love plays its games within them, within themselves. They'll find themselves without.
There've been bootleg copies for sure, and bootleg CDs, and then Eric produced a record and a CD, a wonderful, actually better than the official version. And a professor at Indiana University did all the liner notes. He's a fan too, I guess. He came and interviewed me and interviewed the others, and actually received permission to go into the archives of the Smithsonian to see the original recording session notes and stuff. They have all of that there. So that was a great production. We were very pleased with what Eric did. And then, of course, Smithsonian owns the copyright. You can go on their site and buy the record, or you buy MP3s of the songs and stuff. So that amazed me that it was still being distributed. I had no idea. Not the vinyl. I'm not sure. I don't know where the vinyl came. I just looked it up on Amazon, I think, and I saw it. Vinyl issue, and I bought it. $15. I said, yeah, I'll buy it. It was on Amazon.com, so I imagine it must be the Smithsonian that did that. I have bought copies from the Smithsonian, get half off. This is the artist.
Are there any interesting stories that happened on tour?
I mean, this story, this is a kind of a dark story. We had this gig up at Loring Air Force Base in Maine. It was in the summer of '68. And it was a 2-day gig at the Officers Club. So Friday night and Saturday night. Now, I had just moved into my apartment on Haviland Street to go to Berklee School of Music in the coming fall. And I had met up with some freaks that were like tripping and stuff. And one of them said, the Lord's Prayer backwards is a summons to the devil, right? Now, I grew up with Boris Karloff movies, and I liked horror movies when I was a kid and stuff. And I also happened to be at the school I went to was a Roxbury Latin school. There was a Latin competition for Latin declamation where you'd take like 20 minutes of Cicero or from Virgil's Aeneid, and you'd essentially get up in front of the whole school body, and you'd be one person from each grade level, and you'd declaim it. There would be 3 judges. In addition to the whole school, there's like a judge from Harvard or Princeton or something, and a couple of the prep schools. There were classic professors. And they judge you. Well, I won like 4 out of 5 contest. I mean, and I was the guy to beat. I was really good at Latin declamation. I knew how to project it. I knew how to express it in a way that was persuasive, I guess. So, and the only reason I lost the 5th was because I forgot a passage. That's when I was into the Freeborne, and I could care less about it. I did it because I was expected to. And then the last year I didn't even bother doing it. So, so I had that in my background, as being, first I was a lead singer on stage, and then there was declamation. Well, we had this gig. It was horrible. It was a gig at Loring Air Force Base. There, officers play Louie Louie, play I Can't Get No Satisfaction, play, play Twist and Shout. Yeah, all the regular stuff that you've played 1,000 times. We'd have to accede to their requests and so forth. So it was kind of a bummer of a gig. And, they were kind of obnoxious, they're drinking and stuff, and they get kind of obnoxious. So as soon as Saturday's gig was over, instead of staying there, we decided we'll just leave. We packed our cars up and left. Now we're at the top of Maine, so it's about, probably a good 7 hours or 8 hour drive to the New Hampshire border, 7 hours to the New Hampshire border, say. Well, we left at 2 o'clock in the morning. We didn't get to the New Hampshire border till like midnight. It was a crazy ride. The cars broke down. It was a Sunday afternoon. we needed a part. Louis good with autos. He was looking for a junkyard to see if he could find a part to the car. So he goes off and he's looking for a junkyard. I mean, we're just there forever. It seemed like we started making up jokes about how we could never get out of Maine. We must remain in Maine. We have been doing these silly jokes and so forth. So finally we did get out of it. It was about midnight. And it was a thunder and lightning storm, like the kind that you would see with Boris Karloff's castle, And so it just came into my head. I said, wow, this is, we were in a very strange state of mind, fooling around, kind of just wacky and wild and so forth. And I said, the Lord's Prayer is backwards. It's supposed to be a summons to the devil. So I actually wrote it out on a piece of paper. I had this notebook and I wrote it out backwards, letter by letter. And then I declaimed it. Lo, la, 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 nima, do, lo, lo, blah, blah, blah. And then I remember I curled the paper up and I rolled down the window and I threw it out. Within about 10 to 15 seconds, a lightning bolt hit. We were in the center lane, 100 feet in front of us. We all hit the roof. I hit the ceiling and we talked about that for, I don't know when we stopped talking about that, trying to figure out what just happened. Yeah. It was like, we got our various theories. Coincidence is one. Your bell curve, Most stuff is not like that. It's normal. If you're on this end of the bell curve, something very strange happens, right? Okay, so that's one possibility. I also thought maybe I had sort of intuited a dramatic situation and played into it, knowing sort of intuitively that something was going to happen. It's an actual call to the devil. I don't know. Maybe the time is another thing I was thinking of. 68. That's the year Vietnam, really bad stuff happening on the other side of the world. Altamont, the whole hippie thing is kind of going dark. People are getting into heroin. A lot of bad stuff. I think the Catholic priest thing with kids was starting up around that time. With free love and all the stuff going on. It was so that's another theory, is that I sort of just kind of linked into some sort of thematic air, something in the air, and brought a response. I don't know. I still don't know. Tried to win the lottery one time, didn't work.
That's pretty spooky.
Did you ever see Bedazzled? I don't know if you saw Bedazzled with Dudley Moore and Peter Cook, two British comedians. That's about the Faust thing with calling the devil and asking for some things to happen, and the devil grants your wish, but then there's a twist, So anyway, that was very bizarre. A little smaller thing was at the studio in New York. I don't know if people know Phyllis Diller, if they ever remember the name Phyllis Diller. She was a comedian, kind of wacky comedian with this big afro, silver hair. Well, Mike had left his trumpet in the wrong studio. So when we came to needing the trumpet, he realized it wasn't in the studio we're in, so he went back to that studio. He interrupted his session. The session was Phyllis Diller's singing "I Can't Get No Satisfaction." Yeah, she was recording it as a comic, a comic thing. Phyllis Dinger, "Can't Get No Satisfaction." I don't know if it ever came out or what happened, but he interrupted the session, which is a no-no. They had to redo it.
Thanks for listening to Rat Tales, Boston Rock Stories. Rat Tales is produced and directed by Lenny Scolletta and Mike Hoban, with a huge thanks to Medford Community Media in beautiful downtown Medford, Massachusetts.